Could Justin Jefferson be an MVP candidate this year? See if we can find a way. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day, especially in the midst of June. Appreciate you all very, very much. If you're new here, hello, my name is Luke. You can find this show by searching out Locked On Vikings anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, including YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Today is Twitter Tuesday. That means that I am answering your questions as submitted to me via the Google form, which is linked in the description or in the show notes of every podcast, as well as via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, or I'll usually put out a call on Mondays. You can ask me questions there. And the first one I'm going to answer today comes from Simon, who asks, what is the likelihood of Jefferson winning MVP this season? Do you think it's higher than normal since Darnold and JJ are not seen as top QB talent at the moment? I think it's the most likely he's ever had, just narrative-wise. And you know what? MVP is a narrative award. I know we don't want it to be. We want it to be like whoever this objective measure, but it is a narrative award, right? It's not most statistically efficient player, right? It's MVP. And that will often, the arguments will often boil down to yeah, but he carried a worse team to this far or whatever, right? Here's the thing. We are not in the world of reality if we're having this conversation, and we just have to be okay with that. But in the corner case where, for whatever reason, Mahomes doesn't get it, let's say he misses some time or something like that, and you can't give it to Josh Allen, and you can't give it to all these different quarterbacks. You need to have a kind of a down year of quarterbacking. And I think the only way we get to even talk about this is if Justin Jefferson gets 2,000 yards. If he crosses that milestone and it becomes the JJ 2K season, although he's not he's Jets now. So 2K Jets season. That sounds like I'm a conspiracy theorist, but it needs to be that. And it needs to combine with quarterbacks having a down year, and it needs to be only Justin Jefferson. If there are two games where Justin Jefferson gets taken out of the game because of the doubles and the quarterback does the right thing and finds Addison and finds Hawkinson, and they still put up 35 points, but because the defense overcommitted to Jefferson, if that happens, then I think the argument goes right out. So we really have to whittle it into this corner case, and we're probably well outside the realm of reality anyways, because MVP was just going to go to a quarterback until otherwise the award is otherwise adjusted. Goodney Christiansen asks, does the NFL have any rules equivalent to the fielding a weakened side rule in soccer? So I was not familiar with this, so I asked, and he said it's a rule where you can't just put out a bunch of college players if you're not interested in winning. It's essentially an tank measure. You have to field something semi-competitive kind of rule. And so my understanding is that there isn't anything like that that's a parameter that says you have to do this. There are roster minimums. So you can't show up to a game with too few people suited up. And then, there's practice squad elevations and stuff and all kinds of mechanisms that give the team the ability to hit that roster minimum. And then there's a more nebulous anti-tanking idea kind of thing. If you got caught internally sending emails to each other saying, okay, we're going to lose all our games on purpose and here's how we're going to do it, there would be sanctions for that. But obviously enforcing that is going to be really this super blurry line between what is sucking and what's sucking on purpose. But I mean, look, the understood mechanic is that GMs can, tear their team apart and rebuild all they want. But once you show up to the field, you're trying to win the game in front of you. And that really has never been called into question, but for the one Dolphins thing, which, boy, that turned into a big scandal. And the Dolphins got in a whole bunch of trouble for other stuff, but I think the tanking deal helped the NFL be a little extra mad about it. I guess I'll put it that way. That's just my read on it. Rock NHL asks, could you see the Vikings adding receiver depth after the cap casualties in training camp happens? So I'm not really familiar with like who could be a cap casualty in training camp. Usually the waiver claim type guys are not going to be your wide receiver 3. And it kind of feels like this is what people want. People like Brandon Powell is wide receiver 3 right now. And I think people are pretty dissatisfied with that, which is fair. Like he was 4-5 last year and he just sort of gets anointed the job without really competing with anybody but for Trent Sherfield that he wasn't also competing with last year for it. So, we just lost a guy. We didn't replace him. So everybody's like, how do we get a receiver? But waiver claims on cutdown day, that's you're getting player 52 there, right? Like you're getting special teamers through that. Super rare that you would find that. And if we want to talk about cap casualties, the real significant ones, the ones, oh my God, I can't believe we got Aaron Jones, that happens in March. So I don't think that gives you wide receiver 3. That said, yeah, a little extra depth. Right now you have like Tristan Jackson, who by the way worked a little with the ones in OTAs, something to keep an eye on. Lucky Jackson, guys that like weren't on the roster last year that look pretty solidly set for a roster spot. I could see, like, it'll depend on the camp that all those guys have. Like maybe Brandon Powell has a good camp and the Vikings go, all right, yeah, we feel pretty good about this decision, or Naylor does, or whoever wins that battle. But if none of those guys really jump out and none of the guys really jump out for that 5th, 6th wide receiver spot, then I could see them going, okay, who got cut? Let's see if we can bring somebody in, kind of the way that they did for like backup tackle and ended up with Quessenberry last year. But that's like the level of guy you're getting. You're getting a David Quessenberry level guy. So I wouldn't get your hopes up for somebody exciting. That's not really when this happens. Ken Lovin asks, how do you think the tight end room will play out during training camp and the start of the season with Hawk being out for a portion of the year? So Hawkinson, the comments that O'Connell has publicly made about him suggest week 6-ish is when you get him back, because or like 3 to 6 weeks is what he would miss, which is better than I thought. So I'm still a little skeptical of it. I'm like, that's like that feels a little aggressive to me, so I'm not holding my breath. But that means you've got a few weeks where you're not going to have him. That said, this is not something that you have to like go make a big splashy transaction about. And I think Tunyon is the transaction, the non-splashy transaction that is supposed to paper that over. So the way I see it working out right now is that Josh Oliver is a separate entity. He is the blocking tight end. He's going to be in 11 personnel sometimes, especially in like run situations. He'll be in all the 12 personnel. And for the actual role that TJ Hawkinson would have, maybe not necessarily even the snap count, but like the passing role, I would say that Munt and Tunyon are competing for it. And I guess to a lesser extent, Nick Muse, although he's hurt right now. And I guess Josh Oliver is in that one too. Like he's going through the receiving drills too. If he turns out to be the best receiving tight end in the building, then they'll just make him tight end 1 and forget this complicated thing. But I think it's Tunyon versus Munt for that tight end 1 / backup tight end 1, which is tight end 3. And then you have tight end 2, which is your blocking guy / backup tight end 2. And think of it almost like an O-line thing where like they're different positions in the same group and they'll each have their own backup. And that backup might be a swing backup that's the same guy for both, if that makes sense. That's the dynamic that I'm thinking of it as right now. Alec Lewis said that Tunyon had a really good OTAs. Obviously, that's a super grain of salt. They're all in short, so you can't really do any evaluation in like 10 practices, right? But we'll see what kind of depth chart rotation we have. I don't think he got in with the ones like a lot. So, take all that for what it's worth. But I think you have like Tunyon versus Munt for like a true blue starting job. And then Josh Oliver has the other starting job with, I guess, a chance that Josh Oliver takes the passing job too. Jettis Agent asks, any surprise contract extensions prior to training camp? I wouldn't consider Bynum a surprise. Murphy or KOC possibly. Murphy would be an interesting one, actually, because he is in a contract year. I hadn't thought of that, but that's actually a pretty good idea. O'Connell, I don't see happening. So you'll probably see that happen after the 2024 season, assuming we don't go the other way with O'Connell after like if for a 3-win team, you might think, oh man, this coach has to go. And people will be calling for him the second the first thing goes wrong. Patience sounds great in the off season, but actually having it's another story. But assuming you don't have that, then you'll have probably extension talks with Kwesi and O'Connell next year, because they're signed through 2025. So they'll be going into their last year, and you don't want to be coaching or GMing in a contract year. So they'll extend that contract just for that reason. But I don't think there's a real reason to do it 2 years in advance, unless you just had like the season of your life, right? Then you go get that extension. If you just made the NFC Championship and you weren't supposed to at all, then you take the extension that way. But I think that's more of a next year conversation. The other one people talk about is Darisaw, but I don't see it happening. That would be a surprise to me. Just we're 2 years early on that. Like we do it a year early, not 2 years early. So like they tried to do it with Jefferson, but Jefferson was, I think, a special circumstance. I don't think that just applies to every first round pick. That works out now from here on out. Skullmaster asks, will Cam Akers be a Viking this season? I don't know if he'll be an NFL player this season. I mean, he's got his Achilles thing. He's hurt. He kind of flamed out in Los Angeles. And while I liked what he did this season, it was, I think, too short-lived to intrigue a team and like make them go figure out if he's healthy or not or something like that. So he's like really behind the 8 ball, but hey, suddenly showing up in October after someone gets hurt, like I wouldn't put it past the Vikings, I guess. Got a few more questions here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, so we will make sure we have time for all of them. More stuff coming up. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And it is a great time to get involved in FanDuel right now, whether you are gambling on NBA or NHL finals or what's left of them, the MLB, women's basketball, whatever you want. You can find it all at FanDuel money lines, 3-point props, home run props, crazy parlays, and all kinds of really interesting like featured parlays that they'll always have. So check the FanDuel site frequently as well. You can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet if you sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's $200. Go find any like minus 1,000 money line and go get your marginal win, but also your $200 in bonus bets. You can just get like 40-1 on a minus 1,000. Like it's awesome, right? Go take that opportunity at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks a whole bunch for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, go check out Locked On Minnesota Sports, the YouTube page. Under their live tab, there's a 24/7 Minnesota sports streaming channel. You won't find anything like it on YouTube. Next question here in this Twitter Tuesday episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast comes from Joe Talent, who asks, both my brain cells have come up with how Vikings should run their preseason games. The offense will be behind, new QB. They'll need to help this by starting early. I say Darnold starts the first half of each game, gets the rust knocked off, gets in a rhythm, let the others handle the second half. Okay, so this is sort of a continuation, and somebody even asked again. So last week I answered, will JJ McCarthy ever start in a preseason game? And my guess was that he'll probably start the entire third game and then maybe just the second half of the second game. And maybe he'll get a little bit in the first game and it'll kind of ramp up like that. And that Sam Darnold probably won't play any preseason. So this seems like a response to that. So I'll give you the preseason shtick that the Vikings have given over this, right? Because you do want some warm-up snaps. Joint practices is more reps. Over the course of a joint practice, they'll be joint practicing with the Cleveland Browns this year when they go to Cleveland. Joint practices, think about a preseason game. If you do what Joe Talent has suggested here, have Sam Darnold play the first part of each game, which, by the way, if we're talking about developing JJ McCarthy, starting Sam Darnold more, like you've already kind of like contradicted yourself, but ignoring that, let's say you have Sam Darnold play the first half of each game. How many passing reps is that? Like 20? So it's like 60 reps, let's say. 60 passing attempts. And that's like a pretty pass-heavy half, right? If you have 20. So it's actually probably a lot. So that's a very generous estimate, let's say. 60 passing reps if you get throughout a whole preseason, if you just start the first half of each game. Or like average it, right? Like a quarter and then 2 quarters and 3 quarters, same diff. Joint practice, over the course of a joint practice, you will get like 85 reps. You get like 100 reps over the course of a joint practice. Like you will rep it. And So it ultimately is more warm-up work in a joint practice. It's just not on TV. It's like an object permanence thing. It didn't happen in front of us, so we don't think it happened. This is how Kevin O'Connell has approached it. This is how a lot of teams are approaching it now. Joint practices are everywhere now. This is absolutely the new wave. It is safer because, you're not fully tackling. So it has gone a long way toward like helping reduce injury, or preseason injury. It is easier on your body. It's less fatigue, right? So you're fresher headed into the season, and you at least have the same amount of like preparatory value, if not more, because it is more reps. Like, I don't know why that isn't like clicking with people, but it is more reps. They're just not on TV, and they're not like in the stadium and in an official context. I know it's like just practice, but you do go full speed. You just don't fully tackle for injury risk. So the only thing you miss there is like tackling, but that has nothing to do with the quarterbacks. So I'm all for the joint practice thing. Especially if you get 2 rounds of joint practices, then you're just blowing out the preseason and screw the preseason. But that's the way Kevin O'Connell does it. Whether you like it or not, it's going to be the way it stays. Ryder Jensen asks, ignoring Darnold's pro career so far, who would be drafted first if they were in the same draft class? That versus him and JJ McCarthy. That's an interesting question because Darnold was very likely to be first overall, and JJ McCarthy never really got that hype. So just as prospects, Darnold probably would have gone pretty high, pretty likely to be before JJ McCarthy. He as a prospect was like, he was 20 years old, and that was exciting. He's young, he's moldable, he's very, very athletic, right? He was absolutely, you're like, he's a project, but look at the ceiling kind of prospect coming out. And then the ceiling just never got reached. So Darnold is the risk you take when you go for a Trey Lance or an Anthony Richardson, or this year I guess it's like a Drake May, I guess, was like, he's raw and he's got this stuff to do, but look at the ceiling. That's the risk you take, right? Is Darnolding this. So ignoring what happened in his pro career, yeah, he probably is fighting in the like first 3 picks if he came out this year, right? He's probably 1, 2, 3, 4 then. And we're all like fighting over what our rankings are of like the top four prospects. That's I think where he would have come out, just based on like the hype that I heard. But like we all forget, like we were actually all really surprised when Roger Goodell came out and said the Browns select Baker Mayfield. And the reporting, the like hours leading up to the 2018 draft, somebody reported, yeah, the Browns are going to take Baker Mayfield, and they were like laughed at because they're like, no, they're not. They're going to take Darnold. Come on now. You had Dan Hansis on Around the NFL saying, like, scam for Sam for the whole 2017 Jets season because that was a disaster season for them. Jack from St. Paul asks, what under-the-radar player could help this team most if they take a second or third-year leap? I'm looking at Jaquelin Roy. Jaquelin Roy is a great answer there. If he, like, takes a leap and really breaks out and, like, usurps Jonathan Bullard, who I like fine. I think Jonathan Bullard's a perfectly respectable player. But if Jaquelin Roy like jumps out of his chair and like takes that spot, yeah, that would be huge. Second or third year leap. I mean, it's like be really easy to say like Seen or Booth, but like not Seen because they're good at safety, right? Like you'd have more rotation, but there would be a diminishing return there because you have Bynum, you have Metellus, and they even like what they're getting out of Theo Jackson. Booth would be a huge one, have a big corner that could do something, right? That can sort of either spell or just compete with Shaq Griffin. And then keep Byron Murphy away from some of those size mismatches that offenses has tried so hard to exploit. Now, he's fine at the jump ball, I think, for a small corner, but like offenses are still going to try to like get their big guy up on him and say, we're just going to throw jump balls at Byron Murphy. So I'm thinking like Ed Ingram is maybe one. If he could make a big leap, because he will be starting, like that will just have an effect. You're not replacing anybody. You just get strictly better. But I mean, I don't know, a whole bunch of people from that 2022 draft class. I'm not going to say Ty Chandler, though, just because you already have Aaron Jones. So, yeah, that's also like he has kind of settled into the role that we want it. Like you get a running back in the 6th round, he's your backup running back. Like that works. That's fine. That's what you want in a 6th round pick is depth. Karina asks, which depth chart battle? Oh, I should have said Mekhi Blackman, too. Same reasons as Booth. Karina says, which depth chart battle are you most excited for come training camp? Also, I know you're in California, but do you plan on going to any games this year? Well, they do play in LA. I'm going to try to make it to that one. That's probably it. And then usually my dad and I try to find a way to go to like a road game of some kind every year. So maybe it's that one. I don't know if that would like count because we usually like try to make a trip out of it, but all TBD. In terms of position battles that I'm excited for, I think the corner one is the most compelling to me. You have Byron Murphy pretty locked in. You have Shaq Griffin, who has sort of lost the untouchable, he is a definite NFL starter, like veneer. He's vulnerable. So who of these youngsters is going to step up? Is it Blackman? Is it Booth? Is it, a Caleb Evans? Like, who's going to step up and really take that job? And like, of those four, I could see not all four of them making the team, and all four of them would kind of be like a headline if they were cut. So I think anything can happen, and there's like a lot of shuffling and stuff that can go around as that group sorts itself out. That one excites me. Brian Scheel asks, would you expect that special teams coordinators are hoarding their ideas regarding how to play the new rules or collaborating on ideas? Probably hoarding, because it is like an innovative frontier that if you have the coolest idea, you don't want everybody stealing it, right? That said, I mean, look, guys are friends, right? And they go, hey, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? Like if you've been friends, or, you ask your mentor, what are you thinking for the kickoff, right? Like that relationship might supersede like loyalty to your employer, and that kind of thing happens a lot. But I think everybody understands that it's competitive. So I would probably say that they're hoarding ideas more. A couple more questions to wrap things out here on the Locked On Vikings podcast, Twitter Tuesday. Keeping it going. Next up on Twitter Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast comes Shadow, who asks, is T Higgins a Viking next year? And are we going to have the best receiving group of all time? Boy, that would be very funny after the way that Bengals fans just were like so excited to get Justin Jefferson on their team. So this is coming because T Higgins just signed his franchise tag. He caved. So he's going to show up to all the things. He's going to play this 1 year, almost certainly on the way out. And when you have that kind of situation where it's like, we franchise tagged a player, he didn't want to sign, we didn't give him the contract he wanted, and then he ended up caving and signing. Very rarely does that turn into a contract later. Like that is almost always, negotiations have fallen through. We're going to squeeze one more year out of you and then good luck. But I think T Higgins is probably going to be the top receiver on the market. No, I don't know who else will hit the market that would top him. So he's going to be like the most expensive guy. And whether it's him or someone else, I guarantee you when it's February and I'm talking about free agency, I'm going to be like, don't get the most expensive guy. It's never, even when you have the space for it, it's never smart. It's never a good deal. It always gets overinflated for their value. And, Jamar Chase doesn't hit free agency. T Higgins hits free agency. That's the quality of play. So you're probably bringing him in to be like wide receiver 3, but you're paying top dollar, starter money for him. Probably not the move. And I think for that to happen, you'd have to have some kind of problem with Jordan Addison or God forbid Justin Jefferson. Like you'd have to have some kind of issue where you're like trying to get a wide receiver 2 in here. But I think that's just going to be, somebody else will be much more willing to pay for him than the Vikings will. And the Vikings will probably point their money elsewhere. Hewart asks, which Vikings player do you think could make the best brisket based on vibes only? Okay. You are going to get me in a lot of trouble, because I don't want to try to get into like who's from Texas and like who's from Memphis and Tennessee. Like I don't want to get into any of that. So what I will, but this is based on vibes only. Reisner is a pretty good one. He just had that phenomenal clip from Care 11 about like all the food he's tried in Minnesota. I still watch that frequently. I love it very, very much. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to Reggie Wilson's Twitter feed. But that it's got to be a lineman to me. So that's a really good vibe. A lineman or like a good country bumpkin kind of guy, right? Like a Southern accent kind of guy. I think I'm going to just stay on the safe train and go with Reisner for that one. Next question comes from Eric the Red, who asks, how many middle names of players currently on the Vikings roster could you list right now without looking them up? Be honest. Okay, not looking anything up. So my brain immediately goes to the J's, like the CJ, because I think it's Cortez James, right? I'll look this up after because I'm guessing. Cortez James is CJ Ham. TJ Hawkinson, I want to say his name is His first name is Tyler, but I'm not sure. I'll go with John. His middle name is John. And I'll say that JJ McCarthy's middle name is also John. I'm very much guessing just because they go by a double, but that's all I can't do like random names. It's got to be like somebody that goes by halfway their middle name or something like that. How did we do? Oh, how could I forget? Because he's Cortez Jr., not Cortez. He's Cortez Thaddeus Ham Jr. How could I forget that? How dare I? Boy, I might cut this out. But no, I'm not going to cut it out. My shame hangs for everybody to see. TJ Hawkinson is James. Okay, shoot. So I was on the right track. And JJ is Jonathan James. So I did get one right. We did it. I got one. That's hard. But yeah, we'll see. You know what I might do? Because I'm trying to build something up. Nobody, if you're on the Minnesota Football Party, you're not allowed to listen. But so I did this last year and it was really fun. And I'm probably going to do it again. But with the Everyman series, you get all these like fun little factoids. So I might try to put together like super obscure factoid trivia, you know, like which player's nicknamed Nudie, like fun stuff like that. You know, we've got 3 twins on the team. Who are the 3 twins? And then maybe name as many middle names as you can might be one. Next one comes from Kevin Fessler, who asks, how many Vikings fans would be unhappy if Scene and Booth were let go? Unhappy? I mean, I think you'd probably be ambivalent to it, right? By that point, like if they have, so here's the way that this is going to work with those guys. Unless they come out in camp or preseason and show out and really do well, right? And I do think that Booth is still very much in this conversation. I'm not so sure about Scene. But unless they come out and like surprise and retake their job and it's a Mackenzie Alexander situation, like if you remember, Mackenzie Alexander's first 2 years were like really suspect. He lost his job to Terrence Newman on the inside. He was kind of a head case. Like he was not, Mike Zimmer didn't have like nice things to say about him and stuff. Like it was very clearly not working out. And you thought maybe he would be cut going into the 2018 preseason. And then he kind of had, he matured a little bit. He kind of had a revelation that offseason, and he ended up being a decent player for the next couple of years of his contract, and then even came back after he hit free agency and went to the Bengals and that whole thing. But so like it is not unheard of for a player to be bad for 2 years and then come back, right? Like that is a thing that can happen. But assuming that it doesn't, and these guys just like chill at the bottom of the depth chart, that's going to be the way it goes down. They play with the 4s, right? If they're playing in the 4th quarter of the last preseason game, it's an and then they get released on cutdown day and you move on with your life. You say that was a Donatel thing, that was the old scouts, whatever, you wash your hands of it. Next, onward, right? So in terms of like, I mean, I don't know how you will react. That's up to you personally. But for me, like the thing I'm mourning, the thing I'm unhappy about has already come to pass, right? We have already not seen the defensive addition that those 2 players were supposed to be. I already hate that. So the fact that they get cut, like whatever. I think a lot, like there are fans that will be happy to see them go. And I think that kind of sucks. It's like, it's almost like the problem is there, whether you keep that guy on the roster or not, right? That you missed on a pick. But like being like, haha, get out of here, you're gone is like, hey, it's just kind of like mean. Like, I don't know. It just seems like a very dehumanizing way to be a fan. And I don't really like that. But it also like, it doesn't fix anything. It's just not in front of you personally anymore. So we're back to like object permanence. He doesn't have to be on my TV anymore. It's the like, you know, who's the scapegoat? Let me find the cancer and fire a guy for every problem, which is what we see in the season. And you'll see. I'll get frustrated with this in the season. I always do, because I always get a lot of like, you know, who can we fire? Like, whose fault is this? Who do we fire over this? Who needs to lose everybody needs to lose their job anytime somebody goes wrong. And I can't stand that. You know, there's no real room in the NFL for people to learn and grow. And there's no patience anymore. You know, I mean, like 40 years ago in the NFL, a player would sit and be a backup for 2 years, and that was normal. Like that was fine. You're developing. You're a rookie. You're young. You're getting used to it. It's just, I mean, I know it's not the way we live in social media. Anything that doesn't happen within, you know, a millisecond, you swipe past and you there's no patience anymore. But I'm gonna keep whinging about it. That's it's gonna make me sound old. I don't know. I don't care. Whatever. I will see you all tomorrow. We'll keep going with the Everyman series. We'll keep going with whatever else is going on in the world of the Minnesota Vikings. And as always, Skull.